welcome everyone. I know we're still gathering, but I thought we'd call this to order right at the top of the hour. Welcome to our fifth webinar. I'm breathing a little hard here, but we're getting there. Fifth webinar on the notice of proposed rulemaking that the Department of Labor has issued on apprenticeship. The subject of this webinar is going to be on the quality efforts underway as they relate to the assessment of apprentices rather, and of apprenticeship programs. And so heavy focus on reporting in today's webinar, and eager to get your feedback on how these rules will affect you and your early thinking as you look at these rules. Let me just say that this webinar is part of a series of efforts that Apprenticeships for America is putting forward to really analyze the rules as they've been proposed and to be able to organize the field's response to those rules in the form of comments that will be due no later than, I think, the first week or so, second week of March. So we have a 60-day period to be putting together comments. And Apprenticeships for America expects to be able to assist you as stakeholders and participants in the apprenticeship system to be able to provide comments in that process. Just a little background: Apprenticeships for America, we're the national trade association and advocacy organization dedicated to expanding apprenticeship in the United States. We seek to represent apprenticeship practitioners in policy circles to be able to advance the creation of and the effectiveness of apprenticeship intermediaries, and to support communication and messaging around apprenticeship to be able to drive wider acceptance and adoption of apprenticeship as a pathway to opportunity for America's workers. I'm going to just share a screen here so we have a little bit of a background to guide us here. Give me a second on that. Excellent. Hoping everyone is seeing that. If I could see a thumbs up from my colleague Ben on the share. Did that work? Yes, excellent. Glad to see it. So just a little bit of housekeeping to get us started here. First off, because there's a number of us on this call, we're just going to ask people to keep their mute on, raise your hand to speak. We definitely want to see active participation in this call, and use the chat for questions or comments. We are saving the chat. It's a helpful record of what people are thinking. About Apprenticeships for America, I just gave you sort of the quick spiel. If you ended up on this webinar without having received a direct email from us, that probably means you're not on our email list, and we'd love to be able to stay in touch with you and connect with you. So use the link on this slide, and let me also put it in the chat for you here, to join up with Apprenticeships for America. It's easy, it's free, and we'd love to have you as part of our community of practice. And then also, I just want a little bit of a shameless plug here for our first ever apprenticeship summit that will be taking place in the first part of March 12th through 13th in Washington, D.C. There's a link to sign up for that summit. We'd love to have you there. And we think it'll be an exciting opportunity to share with colleagues the work that we're doing in apprenticeship. Today's session is, as I said, really going to focus on the sort of assessment processes that are built into the new rules as they're proposed, particularly looking at the assessment processes as they relate to the apprentice and some of the expected changes in apprenticeship programs in that space, and then looking at how the new rules would try to foster increased levels of assessment of apprenticeship programs and some of the reporting obligations that go along with that. We'll, of course, have time for question and answers around as we walk through some of the new rules, but importantly, really want to get some discussion and want to hear from you how you think these new rules will affect you, what you think works, what you think is not working, so we can factor that in as we're developing our response to the department. To get started, though, let's just figure out who's in the room here. So if you can, if you've been on these before, you know this drill. Go to menti.com, use that code that's at the top of the screen, or point your phone at the graphic in the left-hand corner. It'll take you right to the website. You can tell us who you are. Thank you to our apprenticeship intermediaries in the room. Always happy to have you here. Glad to have a good representation of folks elsewhere in the system, trainers and workforce development partners. Appreciate your participation. Really helpful. That'll help us um, gear the conversation for today. Thank you so much for that. Um, So, and then just before we jump in, I want to make sure you're aware of some of the materials that Apprenticeships for America has put together on the rules process, um, and some important links that I think will be helpful for you. So sorry, let me just pull that up. So first off, you should be able to download, or you can download the rules themselves, either from the Federal Register at the link given in the chat, and on the screen here. Oops, sorry, I skipped ahead. Or from the Department of Labor's website at apprenticeship.gov, which will also give you the benefit of a little bit of commentary and background on it. We've done a summary of the 700 and some pages, so you don't have to read it if you don't want to. And so there's a link to that summary in the chat. And then we've also done a side-by-side review looking at the current rules, the proposed rules for apprenticeship, and the proposed rules for the new CTE apprenticeship as they're described. And so that can be a helpful look at what's going on. We've published a draft, what we're calling a burden analysis, which is really looking at how each rule affects individual stakeholders in the apprenticeship system. We're hoping to have a final draft of that officially published later this week or early next. And then want to make sure, if you haven't already, sign up for the Department of Labor's webinar that will be providing the Department of Labor's perspective on this. That takes place tomorrow at 2 o'clock. And then finally, we're starting to get the webinar recordings up onto our YouTube channel. So if you missed the webinars, let's see if I can remember them all, on CTE apprenticeship, on the effects on employers, the effects on intermediaries and sponsors, or the work on registration, all four of those webinar recordings are now up on our YouTube channel, and feel free to read those if you're looking for some scintillating viewing. All right, let's move on to the rules themselves in this area. And really, if you've been a part of these webinars in the past, you know I have sort of a couple of key themes I keep coming back to that seem to be sort of driving a lot of the rulemaking from the department in this area. So the first is a real desire to try and improve the quality of apprenticeship programming. And across the rules, you can see a lot of efforts to sort of raise the level of apprenticeship programming, put in place higher standards so that the apprenticeship, a registered apprenticeship in the United States, has the caliber and the reputation that I think we all want it to have. Of course, mandating some of those quality changes does raise burdens or does create obstacles, and so we have to look at that. There's also a major theme across the rules around apprenticeship protection, or apprentice protection and apprentice rights. And so you'll see in these rules, as we're going to discuss them today, some expectations for making sure that the quality of the experience for the apprentice is properly maintained, that the apprentice is getting a good shake in these programs. And then finally, another major theme that really focuses on diversity, equity, and inclusion in apprenticeship, making sure that apprenticeships are accessible to all communities, and that the department wants to be sure, both through regulation and through reporting, that it's making that we're making progress towards that goal. all worthy goals, all great goals. All of them would be great. Our challenge is to figure out how we get to some of those goals without creating a regulatory regime that makes it hard or even impossible to do apprenticeship. Let's dive in. We're going to start with the changes as they relate to apprentice assessments. And really, there are three things here to keep in mind. The first is that there's a lot of new language, I think language that actually encapsulates work that many apprenticeship programs are already doing, but that really stipulate an expectation for continuing and ongoing assessment and feedback for apprentices as they are working through the apprenticeship process, and a desire to have that documented in plans and in registration plans. And so this expectation for sort of continuous feedback is intended to I think address some of the quality interests, quality objectives that the department has been working towards. In addition, the department has introduced a new and largely unutilized, at least as I understand it, requirement around what they call an endpoint assessment. And for those of you who look at apprenticeship internationally, you may know that in England, there's a use of endpoint assessments. This is not an uncommon thing internationally in apprenticeship, but in the United States, this hasn't been a required feature of apprenticeships and is not widely used. So this endpoint assessment in England is highly structured. There's regulations about who can deliver the endpoint assessment, who can develop them. In the U.S. version, in the proposed rules as they currently stand, there's a lot of flexibility around this endpoint assessment, but an expectation that you would have them. And then finally, as it relates to assessment, again, a feature that many apprenticeship programs are already actively using, but is some assessment process that allows individuals who come to an apprenticeship program with background in a field and education related to the field, that they can achieve some level of advanced standing in the apprenticeship program and have an expedited on-ramp into that program. So these three areas are really sort of intended to provide guidance and requirements for apprenticeship program operators as it relates to the assessment of the apprentice. I'll also just note in the CTE apprenticeship framework, there is a requirement that the CTE apprenticeship programs would use what they call industry validated methods for ongoing evaluation. Again, there's not a stipulated expectation about a particular vendor or a particular requirement around what that looks like, but there's clearly an interest there in trying to build up this process of regular feedback and assessment. And then finally, with all this talk about assessment, you wouldn't be surprised to see that the regulations also speak to a desire to make sure that on-the-job trainers are trained or are able to provide these kinds of assessment capacities. And in fact, in the program registration components of the new rules, there's an expectation that you would actually speak to the qualifications of OJT trainers to be able to provide these kinds of assessments. Now, again, there is not an expectation that folks would have teaching degrees or certifications or be accredited in some fashion. There's many different ways that the new rules envision having demonstrable proof that an OJT trainer would have some of these skills, including longstanding experience in the field, which is going to be the case for most on-the-job trainers in apprenticeship. But nevertheless, there's an attention here and a requirement that apprenticeship programs pay attention to this. And then I just want to say a bit more on the endpoint assessment. I quoted directly from the rules on this slide. They must objectively measure the apprentice's acquisition of the relevant skills, knowledge, competencies necessary to demonstrate proficiency in the occupation covered by the program. So, there's many different ways that organizations could get at that. Most work process statements have some expectation or have put some definition to these various components. I think what's different in these rules is that there's an expectation of a summative assessment, this endpoint assessment, that would need to be administered. Um, and given the high stakes of that assessment, a couple of sort of boundaries around it. Number one, that apprentices must at least have an opportunity for one do-over or makeup if they don't pass the assessment, and that any apprentice can ask for a reasonable accommodation as to a particular learning difference or other difference that they feel should be accommodated in some way. So I'm going to stop there and give us a chance just to talk about. No, I'm actually going to do one more thing. So to back all this up, I did want to also say that the department is upping its level of reporting around apprentice level data. And so much of this data is probably data that those of you who operate apprenticeship programs have seen before and regularly enter into the Rapid system if your apprenticeship program is using Rapids. So we're interested in hearing your feedback on just how much of an additional burden seems to be embedded in these requirements, but you can see a lot of information required at the enrollment related to the individual apprentice, and then a regular updating in the in reporting on any changes that the apprentice experiences, whether that's a change in status, dropping or advancing or what have you, credentials that are earned, changes in employment status, wages, and so on. So let me stop there and give this group a chance to ask questions. And I'm actually going to bring in my colleague Ben Watsky from Whiteboard. Ben has been working with us on the processing of these rules changes, and so he'll be helping facilitate this section of the conversation.
Thanks. And it looks like questions are already starting to come in. Would encourage folks to use both the chat and raising the hand raise function if you want to voice over your question. Karitz is the first person to come into the chat. For states that don't use Rapids, how will sponsors report all that information?
Excellent question. And my worry is that we have some paper form somewhere that, God help us, we're going to be filling out. Or maybe one step better, an Excel spreadsheet that we have to put together. So I honestly, I don't know what the answer to that is. And my hope is that there would be some thought given to that. I also think there's a general need for the apprenticeship practitioner community to really assess MIS systems more broadly and how MIS systems can be leveraged for some of this work, so we're not burying ourselves in a lot of unnecessary workflow processes. Great question.
From Jake, any known examples of successful endpoint assessments in the U.S. that inspired OA's inclusion of that in the rule?
So I would love to hear if there's anyone on this call who feels that they are using an endpoint assessment. To my knowledge, I mean, as I've talked to people, no one said, "Oh, we're already doing that." So I'm not hearing a summative and cumulative endpoint assessment for apprenticeship in the United States. But maybe is it Tandaleo? Can you share something on that?
Yeah, so I was just writing in the chat. So our apprenticeship program is a little unique. It's a transition to practice for new grad nurses. So there aren't many folks that are utilizing apprenticeships in that way, but it's a beautiful apprenticeship model. And because there's clinical skills that we need to do in those competencies. So we use the beginner novice to expert competencies, and we do that based on, and you name it, there's all kinds of stuff. There's the technical skills, there's the soft skills in there that we put in there. And so we use that right now, and we do a beginning, a midpoint, and an endpoint that we do that with. And so so that's kind of, and part of that's all part of like their onboarding and their orientation. And so they're, and again, because they're nurses working with patients and patients' lives are in their hands, like we have to make sure that they're competent to be able and safe to practice. So we have to have those. It's just kind of the nature of nursing. And so my question I was throwing in there as you were like, is anyone doing this, is we do have it, and we have something that's based on our, kind of our industry standards in terms of what that looks like and their area of expertise. So if it's OR versus med surg versus the ED, we have, those different competencies that they have. Yep. And there's the basic for nursing, but then the others that they do for the area of specialty. And so my question would be like, do we continue to use what we have, or is there going to be a new standard that you have someplace that somebody's put together? That's the piece that I think about, because I'm like, are they even a nurse? Like,
right. Who's doing this?
Who's doing this? So that's what we're doing. That's kind of how we're using it, but it's also because it's part of our industry standard that we do have competencies for our new nurses that are transitioning into practice.
And I want to thank Josh for adding his comment that there are other occupations where there are licensing expectations and so exams that go along with that. And I think, Tandaleo, your work is part of an occupation that's very high, that there's very high expectations around training, around teaching and instruction, and around proving your capabilities. So when you start from there, it's a little bit easier to think about how you back into this requirement about the endpoint assessment. I think for occupations that are a little more niche or in development, or haven't had that level of professionalization and development around them, are gonna be in a position where they need to make up stuff whole cloth. And I'll just say, from my read of the rules, this is of course a question for the department, but from my read of the rules, I think there's pretty open thoughts on how to structure these endpoint assessments, and there is not an expectation that there would be a single endpoint assessment, for example, for nurses or for high-skilled manufacturing or what have you. So they're not trying to go to a single assessment. Also, I just want to thank Zach from Urban Institute for putting into the chat a direct message to me that reminds me that many SAA states have their own online reporting systems, and presumably those systems would need to be updated to reflect some of the new reporting requirements, with some transition time around that. Ben, you want to help me with other questions or comments in the chat?
Yes, indeed, and it's great to see them coming through. It seems like it's mostly comments so far about the sort of state of folks assessments, but Amy, Donna, Lindsay, Miranda, Melissa, if folks want to weigh in and voice over any of your comments, or if anyone has questions inspired by those, would love to hear them. Love a lively text chat though.
And can I just say, as we are thinking about our own response, we're mining the chats for examples and for feedback. So very appreciative of anything you put there. Lindsay.
Hi. So with regard to my comment, what I was referring to previously in my time as an ATR and SAA state, my JATC committees often had their apprentices doing both first year assessments mid-year, but then all the apprentices were also required to come before their entire committee and do a review prior to entering into or receiving completion. So when I read this, I didn't see it something too far off from that. It wasn't so new to me, is what I wanted to mention. I don't know if that happens elsewhere, but it was something I was familiar with in my state.
Excellent. So it's good to hear that this isn't a completely foreign idea, or at least that there's experience in many apprenticeship programs with assessments at the end that could be called endpoint assessments. How about, is there somebody who's not using this right now and thinks this might be a burden or a challenge for your program? Anyone want to offer a perspective in that direction? All right, and feel free to privately message me if you want on that. All right, I want to just put back the slide that relates to, oh, sorry, full terminology rather than lots of acronyms. Yes, actually, Lindsay, you managed to throw a lot of acronyms in one sentence. I think you might win a bingo prize there. So yes, we'll try to all be aware of that as we're talking here. Thanks, Deborah. Lindsay, no apologies. No apologies necessary, Lindsay. Okay, so just looking at the reporting requirements, this is apprentice level reporting requirements as they're stipulated in the new rules. I'm just wondering if there's any feedback or reactions to anything here that strikes you as new or especially burdensome or especially challenging or difficult. It'd be great to have that on record. Anybody want to add anything? Mary, were you raising a hand? No. Okay. Okay. All right. Oh, yeah. Miranda, please.
Yeah, it seems like most all of this is already in the Rapid system. So when you register the apprenticeship, you have to enter their information to Rapids. Seems like it's already in there. I don't understand why they already have access to that information. So I guess I don't understand the motive behind this.
I will just say a lot of the new rules are in fact elaborations of what the department calls sub-regulatory practice. And so I think they're just trying to put into rules stuff that they've been doing. So a little bit, the knock on the rules, that there's all these new rules, that not always is it new. Sometimes it's just now stipulated. And actually having it stipulated can be helpful because it creates more clarity around it. But that's a very good point. Thank you for asking that, answering that. Stephen.
John, are you saying that you have monthly in parentheses? Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the notion is that within 30 days of any of these events, there would need to be a report. They would need to be reported. So I just said, well, that to me, that seems monthly. But obviously, if you're entering stuff as you go into Rapids, as long as you're doing it within 30 days, you're meeting the requirements of these data collection rules.
Okay, thank you.
Is that helpful?
Mm-hmm.
Yep, great. All right, any other comments on this before we move to program assessment? Yeah, so I wondered if someone would jump in on the supportive services. Thank you, Anne, for raising that. My understanding is that that is not many apprenticeship systems are not actually tracking supportive services. That's a sort of case management sort of approach to apprenticeship, which probably some apprenticeship programs do and some apprenticeship programs don't. So that may be a genuinely new piece to sort of keep track of. Thank you for raising that. All right, I'm going to move us on just in the interest of time. Oh, the question on employment status. So yes, I think that the notion here is if I should look at the actual wording. I will get back to you on that, Deborah. Just give me a second on that, okay? All right, I'm going to move us on to talk about program level reporting. So once again, in this reporting regime, there's sort of two different types of data that the department is proposing be reported on a regular basis. So one is that there's an expectation that certain program changes would need to be reported to the registering office within 30 days of any change. So if there's, and you can see the kinds of things here, largely administrative in nature or having to do with an employer's participation or not in a group sponsored program. I think there's, you can see here changes expected to be reported within 30 days, and probably there wouldn't be a lot of changes for most programs. So that, you know, it has to be paid attention to, but shouldn't be generating an enormous volume of reporting requirements, at least for most apprenticeship programs. On the other hand, the outcomes that are being requested here really do sort of get at the question of whether or not, you know, we're creating new obligations and new expectations that may in fact be somewhat burdensome for some of our apprenticeship sponsors. So just to, you know, the total number of apprentices, total served and completed, some of this information will come from Rapids, which is great, right? But there are some calculations that are expected to be done, some sort of post participation assessment efforts to be done, and so I guess I'd love to hear from the group whether or not the kinds of things that are listed on this page seem to be particularly burdensome, or are they more things that you've been doing anyway, and now it's just a matter of they're in regulation? Any reactions to that?
John, I think that one of the challenges I could foresee is, so we sponsor a number of different employer partners. And so there's a shocking, I know when we talk about healthcare, but there's a lot of turnover on those teams.
Right,
And
right.
so that I would say is probably the biggest challenge is if our champion leaves and now it's trying to get that paperwork or those updates from somebody, because they usually haven't passed the baton on to someone. So we eventually figure it out, but sometimes it's not within that time frame. I could see that being a challenge. Of course, we end up getting the data and all of that information, but I think sometimes if there's a bit of grace in terms of what that looks like, because in healthcare we've had a ton of turnover for our leadership. There's one of our partners, I mean, they've had like 3 folks leave within a year. And so it's gone from one person to another person. So I just foresee something like that where it's a challenge. And again, I don't know what it's like in other industries. I only know my own, but that I could see impacting the way that you collect data or update data.
Great comment, and particularly for larger multi-employer apprenticeship programs, the sponsor could get a little bit snowed under. Just keeping track of all of that, keeping track of changes at the particular employer, and just managing that. And I think for Apprenticeships for America as an organization that's deeply committed to scaling and seeing the growth of apprenticeship, there's an embedded concern here that this may be anti-scaling in some of its application. Great point, Tandaleo. Thank you for offering that. Other thoughts or reactions to this slide? So let me just ask: is this a nothing burger? Is there sort of nothing? Yeah, cohort defined. There is actually a definition of the cohort. So yes, it's in the definitions. I can probably find it for you. Let me see if I can dig that up. Other comments? I mean, I'd love to be able to say, oh, it's kind of no big deal. We're great on this. We can do it all.
I have a comment.
Yeah, Ruth.
Or better yet, a question. So if I'm understanding this correctly, and we're looking at the annual completion, that's kind of, we're going to have to report annual completion cohort. Is that per term, per group? How is that identified? And then you have medium length of time of completion. In other words, if it's a 1-year program, is at the 6-month point? If it's a 4-year program, is it 2-year? Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, so and this was in the chat as well, and I apologies, I was trying to be able to pull it up and I just don't have it right in front of me. There is a definition of what they mean by cohort, and I will say one thing that I think it's important we probably provide some feedback to the department on is that not every apprenticeship program operates in the same way, that there's like a a group of employees that come on all at the same time, and they
Exactly.
kind of work their way through, right? And many apprenticeship programs are, onesies and twosies. And so I think that's either an area to get some more detail from the department, or a place to simply say, maybe this isn't the right metric. Maybe there's a better metric for the whole system. Does that sound right, Ruth?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And can you just say your program, Ruth?
Sure. I'm Ruth Toronto, and I am with Learning Alliance Corporation.
Oh, Learning Alliance. Oh, great. Excellent. Okay. Great to have you with us. Excellent.
Thank you.
Any other thought? Compensation rate. So, Anne, can you just say a little bit more about that?
Are you talking about the completion rate?
I'm sorry, completion rate? Yes.
Oh, just that that we've had trouble over the years when the completion rate is tried to, you put together how many people came into the program within a year and how many completed within the year, but they're not the same, which we've already kind of mentioned that, but still though that is being used as a measurement of what the completion rate is, and it's still not very accurate really. But with having the cohort now, that might work, even though when you have people coming in at different times in the year, that's hard to do it that way. And I don't know, it's just going to take a lot of time for some of these things, but probably if apprenticeship's going to be such a big thing that we're going to use, which we all want to, and expand it and everything, we do have to have numbers, to show people what's happening. So I think the people that do apprenticeship are just going to have to, I guess, go ahead and get this information.
Figure it out. Yeah, but I also think so. I think first off, I completely agree. And in fact, one of the commentators on these rules said somewhat optimistically, well, maybe this is the department getting apprenticeship ready for a big investment. So that would be great if only that were the follow on to these rules. But I will say, I mean, I think one of our responsibilities as we're putting together rules, comments on the rules, is to make sure that the department is aware of the wide array of apprenticeship practices that are out there, and that we're not setting up rules or expectations even around something as simple as a completion rate that just doesn't work for a particular group of apprenticeship programs. So great. Ben, have you been tracking I'm a little bit behind in tracking the comments. So anything there we should call out?
So there's some completion rate questions. One from Ashley Parsons saying, is there a way in that completion rate to denote that some may not have finished the program yet?
That there are apprentices in progress, right?
Right.
Yes.
And a couple comments. Well, Miranda's a sort of half comment, half question, but so many apprentices are getting post-secondary education while in the apprenticeship, and the apprenticeship is a career pathway program. Don't understand the importance of this information after exiting, especially since sponsors may not have the information.
Right. The exiting question and how apprentice programs are collecting that. I mean, and presumably if somebody has exited, but where they've gone and what they've done after that, and what's the obligation, particularly for a program that may not be receiving any public funding. It does feel like you are genuinely adding burden to a program there.
Deborah dropped a couple other questions and comments here, but Deborah dropped one in that's more of a question for the group, which is what platforms folks use to track their apprenticeship data, not just to track for reporting purposes, but also managing partners, apprentices, documentation, etc. I'd be curious too, actually, how people are keeping track of all of those details.
If folks could actually put in the chat, if you have a system that you're using, or if you're using a homegrown system, That would be great to know. And let me, great, engage to serve. Thank you, Ashley. And I will say that this is an area of some interest for Apprenticeships for America. And we've been approached by a number of IT providers to think about how they might be vendors in the space. And so the question is, is there something that a trade association like Apprenticeships for America should be doing to try and organize and bring vendors together with customers in a way that creates win-win solutions. This is incredibly helpful. Thank you. You're using RedCap. That's great, Tandaleo. That's excellent. Okay, excellent. Really, really helpful. Keep them coming. Yeah, Deborah, I will just say I think there is this is a little bit of a carry in the CTE apprenticeship. There's a lot of discussion of connecting apprenticeship with post-secondary education credits and accomplishment. And I think some of that has also shown up in the standard apprenticeship, the non-CTE apprenticeship area as well. So some of that maybe I think there's some value to having those conversations, but I don't want to set ourselves up for some that there's going to be some huge number there. So Excel 2, great. Excellent. And so anything else, Ben? I'm sorry, I'm trying to do too many things all at once here. So
No, I think we have actually covered, I'm just confirming, covered all of the questions, although we are going to be able to save this this chat, right, John? There's
absolutely. So the chat will be
rich
saved, and so just a little bit on next steps, and we are actually getting towards the end of our conversation here. So a little bit on next steps, and then I don't want to shut this down prematurely, but just know that as we are working through the end of the 6 webinar series and listening sessions, we're going to take this information back. We're going to be organizing it into summaries for each of the webinars. There will also be available online on YouTube recordings of the webinars, and the slides will also be available on our website. That should be coming up by the end of this week. So you're free to sort of keep the information and track the information, but even more importantly, we want to be able to make that information actionable. And so by virtue of being a participant in this webinar and signing up for it, you are now on our list as someone who may be interested in participating in a comment campaign around these rules. We view our task as not necessarily telling you what to say, but providing you with the guidance and the facility to be able to add your comments in a way that's hopefully a low burden for you and high value to the department. And so we're going to be working, shortly, you'll be getting some information from us about how to participate in that campaign. Part of our interest is not only to try and get as many comments as possible to the department, but also to track those comments so that we can be working collaboratively with the department on the interpretation of those comments as they go. And I should just say a word or two on the prospects for these rules. So this was a fairly large chunk of rules to take under advisement here. And the last time that the department did this was 2008. So this is almost a once in a generation opportunity for the department. They put a lot in here, but if you've actually read all their commentary, almost every paragraph seems to end with the department welcomes comments and feedback on this particular approach, and we're taking the department at its word. So our hope is that we'll be able to help shape the ultimate disposition of these rules as we work through that comment period. I don't think anyone expects these rules to be adopted anytime soon. So even after the comment period, there will be quite a period, we assume, for the department to review those comments, to comment on those comments, and then incorporate those comments into a revised set of rules. Those revised rules go to the Office of Management and Budget before they become permanent rules. And at least, one person we've talked to has said it seems unlikely that this could be done before the end of the calendar year, but we'll see. And then sort of embedded in there is if there's a change in administration, sort of all bets are off. And then even once the rules are put into place, many transition processes are also built into the rules. 2 years of transition, states have to be given time to update. The SAA states have to be given time to update their processes and systems. Some of them may actually require new legislation. So another hurdle to actually moving forward with new rules. My sense is, watch this space. We want to be very actively engaged in developing the rules that are going to guide apprenticeship for the next 15 years. But don't feel like you have to immediately sit down with your IT team and reprogram your database. That's not something that has to happen next week. Helpful feedback there? Thank you, Tandaleo, appreciate it. Yes, we are actually to the end of our presentation and conversation. There's always a healthy after presentation conversation. So I'll be sticking around for that, but I'll also be turning off the recording so you can say whatever you wish and it will not be memorialized forever. Thanks to everyone for participating in this conversation. We will be continuing our work on the rules and our engagement with you over the coming weeks. Thanks again.